Morning, everyone. Starr Sackstein here with Isaac Wells, and we are going to be talking about shifting the grading mindset today as per the schedule that we put up. I hope that everyone has had the opportunity to look at the schedule. I tried to be thoughtful about the resources that we put in there. What we would love is that while you are in there as well, that you take the opportunity to add your own resources, whether you put them in the chat on Facebook or you put them in the document itself. We could certainly transfer them later as well. But we're hoping that that will be a resource that everyone will kind of go back to and have the resources separated by content. And that'll be easy reaching for everybody since it'll all be there. Hux decided to join us today as well. So we get the addition of his presence, which is always very nice. So as we get started today, I wanted to talk a little bit about what the grading mindset is. And I'm sure everyone has sort of come in contact with this. It's that idea, from a teacher's perspective, it's very much like the justice mindset. There are things that have to be fair. So we create some rules about what the grading policies are and then how we enforce them and what it looks like. And then, what those grades come to mean to us in their role, more so than their function, in terms of achievement and communicating levels of proficiency and mastery. It becomes, how kids think about grading and then the learner identity that is attached to grading as well. Isaac, when you think about the grading mindset, what do you think about? Like, what is that trigger for you?
For me, both as a teacher and as a student, it becomes a way to define a person by what they do, maybe with regard, but often not with regard to who they are. And I just know as a teacher who believed in it early on because I just didn't have an alternative, that I would look for prior performance as something to help me, genuinely believing at the time, oh, if I really know where they're coming from, I'll be able to help these kids accelerate their learning. But what it did was it skewed my view of these children coming in. And so when I looked at them through that lens of grades, I saw them unintentionally as a grade. And then I would find that often their grades would be a lot like they used to be. And that was not a coincidence. That's because I set an unconscious expectation for them. And just like so many experiments have shown, I have one child who really sticks out early in my career. She came in, I knew nothing about her. It was middle of the year. We'd had a bunch of new kids coming in. We had a lot of movement. And we didn't get her, folder or whatever, this is way back in the day, for a couple of weeks. And she was crushing it. And then finally we got in touch with the principal from her old school and found out she had all these special services and things like that. And as soon as the first time she got pulled, not because of our resource teacher, who was amazing, by the way, but the second she got pulled for that class, she came back and she stopped raising her hand. She stopped sharing out. And I know this is a bit of a tangent, but had I seen her grades and she had some genuine needs, but had I seen that at first, I wonder how I would have treated her differently. But then because we saw what she was capable of, that year we were able to really shift the support she got. But literally it was like a light switch turned off. As soon as she found out we knew how she used to perform, she stopped performing. And I don't know the full extent of it, but I know that just having grades changed how I treated students that were in my care.
And I think also, because most of the students I was teaching for a long time were 11th and 12th graders.
Right.
And working in a small school, you get a lot of stories about kids ahead of time. And if you allow other people's perspectives about kids to really cloud your ability to see who they are as learners, I think that we do kids a real disservice to not hold the bar as high as it needs to be for everybody. Of course, taking into consideration the equity piece and giving each kid what they need without it being something that then detracts from what the grade means in terms of their level of proficiency and mastery. So when I think about having that conversation, because when you tell kids, you know, you're not going to be getting grades in this class, or you tell kids that the way we assess in this space is going to be different than it is in other spaces. If you're an elementary school teacher, the kid is only with you. So that's, it's going to impact everything that they do for the entire year. But when you're in secondary and you have multiple teachers, and some teachers don't ascribe to the same beliefs that you do, and it's not a school-wide sort of push, there are things that you need to be aware of and the kinds of conversations you need to be having with students. And often I always started that conversation with, you know, what do grades mean to you? I would ask students, and we would actually have a full discussion of, you know, what they mean, how they're used, positive and negative experiences they had had with them, maybe their parents' influence and what the expectation. Yes, the backlash is real. I just saw that from one of you who are on there. And just, you know, first kind of getting a baseline of where the kids in my classes were. What I often noticed was some students who weren't traditionally high achieving students, even in my AP classes, really had a very negative feeling about grades. So when we talked about the idea of grades being taken away from the learning and that not being a part of the equation, it's definitely something that changed their perspective and outlook about learning. And some of the things that we could do as teachers is stuff that we could adjust right away. It's the language we use about assessment, dropping the word grading in the sense of using it as a verb or even using it as a noun in class, thinking about the assessment of learning instead of the labeling of learning, which is essentially what grades do. Really getting them, like if a student comes to you after they submit a paper and their first question is, what did I get on that? Which was definitely something that would turn my stomach a good portion of the time when that question would arise. Shifting that question to, well, why don't you tell me what you learned? Instead of what did I get? What did you learn? And then shifting the conversation away from, you know, the only thing that really matters is, you know, whatever grade is put on that paper. And with that, making sure that you aren't putting grades on the papers. You're giving copious feedback. There's a lot of written feedback on the document. It's actionable. It's not just something that is talking about how good or how bad something is, but that it, you know, is strategic and thoughtful. Even when it's validating and positive, it's still aligned with a particular standard or a particular strategy.
Matt followed up with this comment that on the flip side, if you've been successful in this system, it's not only hard, but it's terrifying to let go of it and to try some other things. And he really said, like, on the positive side of it, takes a lot of trust building.
It does.
Right at the front.
I will say, Matt, like, I was an A student. I'm sure those of you listening who have watched my TED Talk know that I talk about this a lot. It was a huge part of my identity, and I could identify with my high achieving students the same way. But so much of those high achievers' efficacy has less to do with what they know and can do and how well they do play that game. And the focus for such a long time has been misplaced. And the focus of what needs to be focused on, the skill building and the thoughtfulness of, you know, of what that actually means, it's going to be as anxiety inducing as getting a low grade might be at first. But the more you remind them that not having the grades is going to be something that is going to help them grow as learners. We're going to use that metacognitive piece where they're going to be reflecting and sharing their own thoughts about their learning, and that's going to be a part of it as well. And I think that the real challenge, and I just see, is that Matt who added that comment as well. A lot of teachers want me to tell them exactly what will happen if they do the switch.
That's Deanna.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it's hard to predict exactly what'll happen with all kids, because depending on what age you're with the kids at, how long they've been in a system already, if they've experienced any other kind of assessment process, it's important conversation to have with your colleagues in terms of their understanding that, first of all, on the front end, it is going to be more work. But what it also forces you to do is it forces you to give up control, because you need to invite the students into the process more, so that all of that work you're doing isn't your own. You're making the kids more accountable for the learning that they're doing. And you have to be okay with it, that you aren't the only person in the room with expertise to share, to provide feedback and help kids move forward. There are different strategies that need to be done. It is a leap of faith. It definitely is. For not just us to do it, but for the kids as well. Even if they admit that the grades that they get don't adequately reflect what they know and can do, it's still a teacher making the decision about where they are in the class at that time. And it's this ranking mechanism that is so flawed in so many ways, albeit an efficient way of managing sharing communication about learning. And whether you use a number system or a letter-based system, it lacks the depth and range to really do justice to what kind of communication needs to be done for real learning, the precision that needs to go into that. And those are all things you have to be really transparent with kids about, with your colleagues about, with your administration, with the parents, and invite their questions. Don't be afraid of their questions. Invite them. And if you don't have answers, you don't have to fudge it. You could say, give me a second to get, give me a day. I'll get you a good answer to that question after I think about it a little bit. I don't always think that we have to answer on the spot, and then that answer becomes what gets set in stone. And if we do make a fast answer, it's also okay to come in the next day and say, upon further thinking, I really don't agree with what I said yesterday, and I think we need to talk about it a little bit more. And this is what I thought about. And I think modeling that reflective process for students, for colleagues, for administrators, for our, for families, shows that this is still something that's in process, and that's what we're really trying to get to a place where we could think about the things that are happening and give really thoughtful, meaningful feedback that best communicates the skill set and content knowledge that kids need to be successful in those spaces.
I know, first, as you mentioned, and as is shared very clearly in your TED Talk and in many of your books and blogs, that grades do become not just a label for us, but really central to our, I'm losing the word for it, but like just the way we see ourselves. Yeah, our identity. Thank you. I couldn't get it. And that was true for me, for sure. But then also there can be that wonder in there when you're not sure of why you have that grade. You really question it. Like, am I fooling these people? I did do my best on this, but I did my best on the other one. I got a low grade on that. I got a high grade on this. And then I'm thinking back to my middle school days, but thinking about debates in the very early 90s about, like the death tax and things like that. And why is it that, the 99% of us won't realize that we probably shouldn't have tax breaks for this very small percentage of people, and I know this sounds way off, but I think
No, I
sometimes
totally
the
get where you're
same
going.
reason, yeah, that we don't want to get rid of grades is if we've not achieved those grades, we still want our opportunity to have that, even though we may be living in a system that intentionally or not was designed in such a way that we're not going to have that. And when we just look at grades, across the country, if we see these major racial discriminations, we see discriminations in different courses based on gender and things like that, then obviously it's not working. But if I'm someone who fits into uh, one of those groups that's been minoritized, it's very hard for me to say that I don't want to benefit from that system that has benefited others, even though, just to be clear, the system has not actually benefited those people. It's just presented that look of doing it. Because you and I had a very easy introduction to school. I had amazing teachers, but I also had two college educated parents. I had a very easy life and things like that. But I probably would have done better had I had you as a teacher or you as an administrator who was able to say, Isaac's learning is not whether or not he can get an A on this. It's whether or not he's actually learned this and can use it later. Uh, but I do think there's that kind of group mentality of like, well, if it's been here and it worked for them, maybe it'll work for us.
See, and it's funny you should say that, Isaac, because neither of my parents were college graduates,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
my mom actually finished high school at night. And
Right,
so,
right.
like, I did not come from parents,
Mm-hmm.
not that they didn't value education, but they themselves didn't see it as a part of their own path. So
Right.
I was the first person in my immediate family to go to college to get an advanced degree.
Mm-hmm.
And now, with all the work that I do around this stuff, my dad has taken a tremendous interest
Yeah, of
in,
course.
like whenever I put videos like this out there, or I write short articles, he has a lot of questions because the way the system
Mm-hmm.
was always rigged in the past was a very power oriented hierarchy where the teacher was the arbiter of what you knew and could do. And they were
Right.
the ones that made the final decision on everything. And nobody even questioned that. It was just that's how it was. And
Mm-hmm.
now we're in a very different world where access to information for most people is readily available. Memorizing facts is no longer something we need to do. You don't have to read encyclopedias. They couldn't churn out encyclopedias fast
Right.
enough to keep up with the information that's out there. And now we have this systemic struggles with equity in general, like you had said before too, where the way the system is always run has already had a hierarchy in there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is obviously a much larger conversation about equity in terms of zip codes that you live in, financial resources that are available, the kind of
Mm-hmm.
tracking and class levels that are also available to kids as well, and where they get tracked has a big place in it. I'm thinking back to our internal book study on belonging
Right.
today, and something that came up in our group was just about belonging coming before access.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to create this environment that allows for belonging, we were reading A Culture of Belonging by John Crownapple and Floyd Cobb. And basically, this idea that in order for students to really achieve, there needs to be a culture of belonging, and there
Mm-hmm.
also needs to be access to the different spaces and resources that go into that so that folks can equitably get what they need to be successful without judgment. And in a lot of ways, grades place so much judgment and labeling. And even though we think of the less successful kids in that grading atmosphere as the ones being most negatively impacted, I will even posit that the higher achieving kids also suffer from that system.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of insight that can be gained from folks with different perspectives who haven't been tracked in those higher level classes the whole time. And a lot of folks opt in and out of those classes for a lot of different reasons. Um, and being successful in a typical AP class has a lot to do with the skill set of being in those classes, the study skills, the expectations, the load, and the support you get at home in order to stay successful in those spaces. So there are so many things that are also working against kids. Whereas if we met kids where they were in every single class, we have that baseline of the skill set they're coming in with. We teach them to set goals. And then from those goals, we provide very targeted feedback. And we don't label any of it A, B, C, D. It's just, this is the level, this is where you are on the progression right now, based on the standards. This is where you are setting your goal to be. This is how close you are to that goal. These are the things you could do to get there. And then once you get there, we could set a new goal. And the same way kids could do gaming and level up when they reach a certain level, when we think about mastery of certain skill sets and content matter, we need to really think about the entry points as well as what we're doing along the way to push each and every child in the direction they need to go in to be successful. And their parents will be a big part of that struggle, don't you think? I mean,
definitely. I mean, and like what your story is essentially this like American dream story we always talk about, that you've used this education to change your life for the better and to change the life of your family and to change the life of so many. And then even I love how you shared that like it's created this interest and curiosity for your father. I mean, how cool is that? And to show how the system could be different. But then how few of us have that opportunity to even engage in a conversation like this, just because we're so used to it, we don't think about it.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the other thing too. Like, my dad always jokes that he would probably have done better in school if he had a teacher like me.
And
it's
not a joke.
And I hear that a lot from folks who didn't play school well. You know, this idea that having access to that game is really what creates that whole hierarchical imbalance, really. Because traditionally affluent folks, privileged folks, have more access to be good at the system, and the grading systems generally support those methods as well. If I'm not doing so well in an AP class and I come from, you know, the right side of the track, so to speak, my parents could buy me tutors.
Right.
There could be extra supports that the schools can't give me to ensure my success, so that my transcript looks a certain way and so that I could get into the college of my parents' choosing. And I see somebody added here too. Going gradeless is more like real life than grades. I totally agree with that. And then
that's Jamie, yeah.
It is. I mean, aside from teacher evaluation tools, which for the record I don't agree with either. I do want to put it out there that my feelings about labeling any learner, adult learner or child learner, is not the best way to get folks to move, which is why I think sometimes teachers are more open to having instructional coaches who are other teachers in their classrooms providing feedback than they are in more traditional observation settings where your administrator comes in and then judges you based on different criteria. And my favorite part of that whole observation process when I was a leader was having those pre-observation conversations. When I went into the classroom, I wasn't going in there to look at what was wrong. I was going in there to look at what was right. And then if other things didn't meet the level that they could have met, it was a conversation. And I didn't wait till the post-observation to slam them with that, realization. As soon as the observation was over, I'd sent them the script to the observation, and I would put, I'm wondering. There wasn't accusations. It was like, these are 3 questions I'm wondering about that, I can't fill the gaps in certain things from this lesson plan or this, what I observed. Please be ready to talk about these things when we come in for our post-observation. So the same way I would give a student the benefit of the doubt in the classroom when I was trying to understand what they really knew and can do and what they were trying to do sometimes if it missed the mark, it was the same way with teachers. We're all just learners. There's always room to grow, even if you're quote unquote highly effective.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't make you any less of a learner because you've achieved certain levels of success. I received my first distinguished rating this year, and I was never once. Wow.
That's Casey Sparks. That is funny because I was just thinking about having often been like distinguished or highly qualified, like all those things, and how there is that part of you that hears the opposite of whatever you say. The same reason we don't say to a kid in our class, you're so pretty or whatever, because everybody else here is like, but I'm not, and it's unintentional, but I kind of hear that. And then to have someone get that positive rating without evidence, I want Casey to maybe share a bit more, but I imagine that I would almost rather have a lower rating than get told you're knocking it out of the park with no
and Casey,
support.
for the record, there were many years when I was in the city that
Mm-hmm.
I got like phantom observations. They'd wind up there at the end of the year, but they never actually came into my classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if I was getting that satisfactory rating, because for a long time in New York, it was unsatisfactory or satisfactory, and then we moved to Danielson, and it became highly effective. The middle, I guess, what's the one before ineffective? I don't even remember.
Like developing, is it from New York? I think, yeah.
And then ineffective at the bottom. I think that it's so important that we think about the way that we label and the impact of those labels, like Isaac was saying, because they carry a lot of emotional weight that sometimes could quash the desire and curiosity to learn more. And I think we have to be super mindful of how we talk about learning, and even learners who aren't on grade level when they get to us by the standards still bring positive attributes to the class. And I think too often our system focuses on that deficit mindset where we're always focusing on what they can't do well. And then that somehow becomes more salient than the things that they can do well. And that's a part of shifting the grading mindset as well. Thinking about things from strengths, from a mindset of strengths and how we could build on those strengths, as opposed to dealing with the deficits. I think students would be a lot more open to growing their deficits if we focused on their strengths first and built up the deficit while we were building the strengths. Nobody likes to feel stupid or to be called out in front of a room full of people. It's humiliating. And a lot of times with grades, we unintentionally humiliate our children, especially if they work super hard and then they get something back that doesn't reflect what they feel they thought they were going to earn. So imagine how much easier it would be to provide feedback where you could still talk about their strengths and where they also need to grow, but never have to label it as good or bad. Just say it what it is, and then provide whatever strategic feedback you need to keep them moving in the right direction. And that's really what that mindset is. And until, just like with a growth mindset, we flip it completely, you always have to ask yourself, how is this pushing the learning? And whenever we put a grade on something, we are effectively ending the learning. So we want learning to continue and to move and groove. Even on summative assessments, there are ways to have markers that aren't necessarily numbers and letters. So Isaac, as we're wrapping up for today, is there anything else from the group, that questions that have arisen during this conversation that we can address?
One, can I share a quick quote? You saw me jump up for seemingly no reason, but what you were saying just made me think, and you can see I have two copies of this because I have too many sticky notes in the other one. This is the book Starr mentioned, oops. But in our conversations last week, this is one of the quotes we pulled out from the chapter on recognizing distortions of dignity.
Yep.
And I promise to be quick, but this is on that idea of deficit thinking. And it says, as a construct, deficit thinking provides language for the dynamic that grants permission for educators to blame the students for their poor performance within a system that sends them countless signals that they do not belong. And I wonder how many times in my past and in others, in my current life now, that we use these systems because they're convenient, because they release a bit of that responsibility. Like, well, this type of student or this label or their history or whatever it may be, that's why they're not succeeding. Or right above it, it says that they fail in school because they have inherent inadequacies that obstruct the learning process. And so anyway, your conversation just made me think of that quote. So I want to share that.
No, I'm so glad you did. I'm dropping maybe Isaac, you could copy and paste this. Here's a link to that book
Mm-hmm.
From Amazon. I just posted the link in there.
Yeah.
I think that it's so important that when we're shifting, we are acknowledging those concerns and anxieties. We're keeping the lines of communication open with all stakeholders about the why. We give students ample opportunities to be successful, and we ourselves continue to see ourselves through the lens of a learner, knowing that there will be days that you snap at a kid because they ask you about something and you're having a bad day, and that happens. But as long as we rectify that by apologizing and, having a conversation after the fact, I think we could correct a lot of the harm that we've done by giving students their dignity back, by not labeling their learning in the ways that we do. And I think that it's super important that we're cognizant of the impact of our words and of the structures we put into place in our classrooms. I see one last comment here about the switch to SPG and how I very much had that same experience where the 4-3-2-1 still ended up being labels that kids used and understood. And when the percentages in the grade book kind of got put in there, it also had that same sort of feel. So you really do what you learn. Going to SPG is a really awesome first step. And I think it's really important that we take that first leap. And if you're not ready to to get on the bike and take the training wheels off all at once, that's a great first step. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if we really truly want to honor students and their learning, we can't be labeling it. Grades it's just a dangerous thing. Next week, it looks like our topic is going to be setting up routines and rituals around the no grades classroom. The calendar has been posted, and we'll post it again. Again, we encourage you to add your own resources in there. Think of this as a receptacle for folks to just keep adding. And so that when it comes time to have those conversations, like I mentioned in Hacking Assessment, you do have a wealth of resources at your fingertips to be able to bring to your administrators or your colleagues who may not get it right away. So thank you again. I hope everybody has a great Friday and a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.